You may have heard that when you are investing, you should only invest in businesses that have a competitive advantage. However, competitive advantages are entirely overrated, where at the same time, they are all that lies in between a very mediocre and a very high quality business. And so, how can this be? Well, like many truths, this is a bit of a paradox. And the reason why this is because of different timescales. Now, a competitive advantage is something that allows a business to basically charge more than they would have been able to otherwise. And they are capable of doing this because they do not have to worry about competition because of this advantage. However, on a long enough time frame, there's almost no competitive advantage a business can have that will prevent someone else from copying them. And so that is why they are both so important, but also totally overrated. What you should do instead, though, is look for companies that have interlocking moats. Now, let us rewind and first talk about competitive advantages and their importance and what you should do instead. Now, as I mentioned, a competitive advantage allows a business to basically earn a higher return on invested capital than they would have been able to otherwise. You can imagine in a world where there's 10 hamburger restaurants and all of them are exactly the same, they will not be able to charge any premium price relative to one another. But if one of these hamburger restaurants has a much better tasting burger and it has better sauce and it's healthier somehow, then they will be able to charge a premium. That would be a competitive advantage. Now, the question would be, how easy is it for other competitor restaurants to copy that formula that superior burger restaurant has? And so a competitive advantage is really two things. It isn't just the fact that this business has an advantage. It generally is also inclusive of the fact that someone else can't copy that easily. Now, when we say a business has a competitive advantage, that typically just means that they are doing something that another business is not able to do easily. And when another business cannot do it at all, we call it a moat. And so Warren Buffett always talks about how he wants to invest in businesses with moats. Now, a classic example of a business with a very strong moat is Moody's. Moody's is a credit rating agency. And so what that is basically whenever a company has to issue any sort of debt, they have to get it rated. Maybe you heard AAA ratings, AA, A, triple B, double B. There's all sorts of different ratings, and Moody's is the one that gives that rating to the issuer. Now, this is really important because the higher the rating, the lower the borrowing cost for the company. And so companies want to get their debt rated because it not only is going to lower their debt cost, it's also going to make it easier for them to get someone to buy their debt at all. Now, Moody's has a competitive advantage here because there's only 3 credit rating agencies that are legally allowed to exist right now. And in order to start a new one, you have to prove that you have experience rating debt. And so it's a real chicken and egg problem. Now, of these 3, Moody's and S&P Global are the biggest, and they have the biggest brand names. And so most debt issuers get them rated by both of those companies. And because there's a direct cost savings in terms of a lower borrowing cost for the company, they are willing to pay a large premium for this service. And so this position gives them a very strong moat. No one else can do what they are doing because in order to do what they are doing, they have to prove that they were already doing it in order to get the regulatory approval. And so I know that is a mouthful, but that is why Moody's has such a strong competitive position. And so that is a competitive advantage. Now, the term moat doesn't really have a precise definition. It's a little more colloquially used. But when people use it, what they basically mean is a company has a competitive advantage that someone else can't copy easily. And so this now brings us to the core part of this video and this new idea that I think a lot of people overlook, which is this idea of interlocking moats. And so the idea of interlocking moats is that you want to invest in a business that doesn't just have one competitive advantage, but has many competitive advantages. And the reason why that is because if they only have one advantage, it is quite likely over time that someone will be able to copy that. However, if there's 2, it becomes exponentially harder in order to go after that business. And so a real simple example is we can look at Amazon. Amazon has a marketplace. A marketplace means that there's buyers and sellers that aggregate together. Now, just to build a marketplace of millions of buyers and millions of sellers, is a really hard thing to do because buyers don't want to go somewhere where there's no sellers, and sellers don't want to bother putting their products somewhere where there's no buyers. And that is why marketplaces, which have this sort of network effect, tend to be a pretty strong competitive advantage. But in and of itself, it's not that strong. And in fact, you can see how quickly you can spin up a marketplace if you have enough incentives and subsidies initially, which we just observed with Temu. Temu was able to spend a lot of money in terms of promotions for consumers, which got them to download their app and try to buy stuff. And then very quickly, that helped increase the amount of sellers that were on the platform because sellers are happy to sell on any venue that they could get buyers. And so that just really created a quick flywheel for Temu, and they were able to grow very quickly. Now, Amazon, though, was not totally threatened because they didn't just have one advantage. Now, one competitive advantage would have been the marketplace, but they also have an entire logistics apparatus, which allows them to do one-day and same-day delivery. Now, those two together makes it a much more formidable competitive position because Temu was stuck delivering items that maybe took a week, sometimes longer, to get to the consumer. Now, on top of that, Amazon also layers in Prime, which is a third sort of interlocking moat. And so now you have these three things that are working for Amazon together. You have the fact that there's the marketplace, there's this entire logistics apparatus that includes fulfillment and last mile delivery, and then you also have Prime, which helps subsidize the entire logistics operation while also locking members in. And so those are very strong competitive moats. But on top of that, they have something else, and it's actually the most important. It is trust. The more you buy from Amazon and the more you don't have any sort of issues buying from them, the more you come to expect items to come quickly, or if there's a problem, it to be solved without any issue, the more you trust them. And that just lowers the friction to purchasing anything at all. Whereas in contrast on Temu, many people feel like they have to vet the items a little more. They're not entirely trustworthy of what they're getting, which is okay because it's usually very cheap items, but you wouldn't want to buy anything expensive on the site because of that. And so even in the scenario where a lot of Temu buyers didn't actually care about same-day shipping, which was a real problem for Amazon because that is really one of their strongest advantages, is this quick shipping. And so Temu buyers who didn't care about the quick shipping still may have preferred to buy on Amazon even though it was more expensive, just simply because they trusted it more, it was more convenient for them, and they could just buy something and know it would get there without any sort of hassle. Whereas with Temu, it's a little bit more vetting. You're not exactly sure you trust the sellers, etc. And so not that Temu wasn't very successful in fulfilling very specific consumer preferences, namely low prices, but they were not able to really make any sort of material impact on Amazon because Amazon has this sort of interlocking competitive advantages, or what I like to call interlocking moats. Now, Amazon is not alone though. A lot of great businesses have these interlocking moats. Copart, for example, which is a business that specializes in salvage car auctions, which in plain English basically means whenever there's a car accident, they're responsible for picking up the car. If the insurance company deems that the car is going to be totaled, which means that it's not worth repairing, they're going to take that broken car and sell it online. Now, there's actually a lot involved in this, though, because you have to have this entire tow truck operation. You have to have places to store the cars. You have to clean up the cars a little bit before you auction them. Even though it's salvage junk, they sell better if they're a little cleaned up. And then on top of that, you have to have integrations with the insurance companies so you could keep track of all the cars, tell the insurance companies which ones to total or not. You have this sort of data advantage layered in because once you get data on all these vehicles, you know the prices of everything, the repair cost, and so you're able to tell the insurance company when to salvage it and when to pay to repair it. And then on top of that, you have this sort of marketplace of buyers and sellers. The sellers in this case are the insurance companies. The buyers are global and they have millions of them. And then they also have all of this land all over the place, which you need to store the vehicles. But also, and very importantly, in the case of these catastrophic events, which is, a hurricane or something where maybe they get 10, 20 times the amount of normal car totals in a single week, they have to have all this surge capacity to deal with all of that. And so because of that, everything from the land, the marketplace, the integrations with the insurance companies, the data, all of these are interlocking moats, which makes competing against them very, very hard. Right now they have a market cap of around $40 billion, but if I were to give you $40 billion, you would not be able to recreate their existing business. And so that is why interlocking moats are so powerful. It becomes basically exponential. If you think about how hard it is to do a single thing, imagine then doing that thing thing, plus another thing, plus another thing, plus another thing, and doing all of these things without any sort of issue. And this is actually something investors overlook all the time. And that is that when you have to get multiple things right, the probability that you're going to do that all correctly, it actually goes down a lot. So if you think that there's these 4 things they need to do, and the competitor has a 75% chance of getting each of these 4 things correctly, then it's 75% times 75% times 75% times 75%, which is about a 30% chance they do them all. And so that is why it is really important to look for these businesses that have these multiple competitive advantages, because it is exponentially harder to compete against those businesses. Now, if you want to understand exactly what a great business is, make sure to check out this video here. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and hit like and subscribe.